This is my 40-gallon breeder American Bullfrog Paludarium. I made it about 3 years ago, and it is the first project of its kind that I have created. I'd say this is pretty impressive for a first build, but over the years I've run into some issues that have led me to want to remake it. It is a Mexican cenote-inspired design, with a waterfall that drips down into a sinkhole, and underneath of the land area is a cave. This is pretty ambitious, but I executed it quite poorly. The design makes it difficult to maintain and clean underneath of this land area. Over the years, I've also come to learn that this bullfrog is particularly shy. He usually hides back in this pot here, and even with the abundant duckweed, he rarely comes out on land. I hope to create a new build where he feels safer and more comfortable. The cocoa fiber background has also deteriorated, especially at the parts where it's in contact with water. Right here it's growing algae on top of it and just melts right off. The waterfall feature also never really took shape as I wanted it to. It's really just a tube sticking out of the background. The placement of this filter also makes maintenance very difficult, so I plan to just keep it out in the open in the new build. The first step was siphoning out all the water. Thankfully, the frog didn't freak out during this whole process and decided to stay put in his pot. Next, I took out the frog and put him in a temporary 10-gallon holding tank. This should only take a couple of days, so he should be fine in here. I also removed this log and put it in here, just to give him something to hide behind. The pumpkin seed fish was placed in my 50-gallon goldfish aquarium for the time being as well. Next, I began removing elements of the hardscape, like this clay pot and rocks. With all the water gone, you could finally see in the cave area and just how filthy it was under there. Some roots had grown in from above, which looked kinda cool, but it was also very disgusting at the same time. Next, I started removing things from the land area. This Syngonium took a bit of pulling, but it came out pretty easily. I took notice of all these springtails living on this rock. They're so incredibly tiny. They look like little people in a forest next to all this moss. They're an important part of the cleanup crew here on land. They break down decaying organic matter and return its nutrients to the soil. It's so incredible how tiny they are, but you can still see them. They're barely noticeable otherwise. Next, I started removing the substrate from the land area. This is well seasoned, so I plan to use it again later in the new build. Next, I started disassembling the land area. The first to go was this weed control fabric, which doesn't really do much to control the roots, as you could see earlier, but it stops soil from falling through the egg crate skeleton that the land area is made out of. Eventually, I wiggled it enough to the point where it just came right out. The cocoa fiber background was also extremely easy to remove, as over the course of 3 years it had degraded severely. This stuff doesn't last very long at all when exposed to water. You can actually see here the patch that I had made previously. Next, I started scooping out the aquatic substrate. After everything was removed, I could lift the tank off of the stand and bring it outside. Unfortunately, in the process, I bumped my poster off of the wall, but none of you saw that. I started removing pieces of the expanding foam background. The pink insulation foam base was still siliconed onto the glass, so I planned to keep that on to use it for the new build. Outside, I hosed down the tank to remove any dirt that was still left inside. Unfortunately, while doing this, I realized that the silicone bond between the pink foam and the glass had deteriorated over time, so I decided to remove it. I used a razor scraper to remove any silicone still left on the glass. This is important because new silicone does not stick very well to old silicone. It took a lot of work, but I scraped the remaining silicone residue off of the glass, and it looked brand new. After the tank was completely stripped of everything, I let it sit outside overnight to dry. The next day, I started making measurements to build the new land area. The land area was made of pieces of egg crate light diffuser that I zip-tied together. This was the finished design that I had come up for the land area. I think that this would give a nice mix of land and water. This land area was also built with the pot in mind. The frog likes to hide in here, so I thought that I would incorporate it into the design better this time. Next, I started cutting sections of weed control fabric. This will go on the top to stop dirt from falling through the holes of the egg crate, as well as on the sides to give expanding foam a surface to hold on to. This triangle portion of the land was kept uncovered on purpose because I planned to put gravel and plants in here to give them direct access to water for better biological filtration. Next, I cleaned the glass with alcohol just to make sure that the silicone had a clean surface to adhere to. The silicone I'll be using is just GE all-purpose silicone. It's pretty cheap and is aquarium safe. After silicone was applied, I put weights on top of the structure to make sure it would keep a nice bond with the glass. These are the pieces of bark I plan to use for the new background. I'm not sure what species of tree this is from, but it looked really cool with lichens and mosses already growing on it. I also thought it would be much more durable compared to cocoa fiber. I used a wire brush to scrape off the underside of the bark. This would provide a cleaner surface for glues to adhere to. I placed the bark on some pieces of egg crate and tried different configurations to find a design that I liked best. Next, I adhered the bark to the egg crate using expanding foam. I've never seen anybody do this method before, so I was skeptical when trying it out. But this resulted in a much thinner background, which led for more space to work with in the actual enclosure itself. I was very happy with the result that this gave me in the final project. When I finished applying the foam, I put weight on top of it to keep the bark in place. Next, I used black expanding foam to give more character to the land area. I left both of these to dry for 24 hours. The next day, the foam had cured and the bark was stuck firmly to the egg crate. I was very impressed by this because I had never seen anybody else do this method before. I'm happy to say it worked out very nicely. Next, I took a razor and started cutting out all of the excess foam. I took what was left of the black foam and I put it over top of the remaining white areas. This will blend a lot nicer in the final product and make these divisions less noticeable. I spread out the black foam with my fingers and made sure to cover up as much of the white as possible. I sprinkled cocoa fiber over the black foam. While it was still wet, the cocoa fiber would stick to it. This would further help to blend the divisions between the pieces of bark and make it look more natural. This is what it looked like once it was all applied. It's not my best work, but it should do. I tried fitting in the background, but I ran into a problem. It was catching on the corner here due to the overhanging pieces of bark and foam. I took it off and was able to cut it flush just using my fingers to rip off the overhanging pieces. I also used a razor to cut off pieces of foam from the land area. This would make it so that the background would fit easier. Now that everything was cut to shape, I applied silicone to the glass and I put the background in place. I also applied weights to make sure that the silicone would get a good bond with the egg crate. This wasn't an exact measurement, so there were gaps between the edges of the background and the glass. I just shoved a piece of cocoa fiber liner in between here. It fit pretty snugly. The next day, when the silicone was dry, I took it back into the fish room and put it on the stand, this time without knocking over the poster. Now it was time to add substrate and decorations. I started off with some fluval stratum. I'm not really that keen on what it does, but it says it's good for plants, so I added it. I spread a thin layer on the bottom of the tank. I put it in first because this stuff has a tendency to float, so I want to make sure my other substrate is on top of it. Next I added in pea pebbles. You can just get these from Home Depot. They're pretty cost effective and safe to use as long as you thoroughly wash them. Next I added in the pot and made sure that it blended in nicely with the surrounding landscape. I got a configuration for the hardscape that I was happy with as well. Next I started adding back the terrestrial substrate I took out originally. Eventually I ran out of the old stuff, so I just used some topsoil to fill in the rest of the space. This is also just stuff I got from Home Depot and had lying around. Now that all the hardscape was finished, it was time to start adding back in the plants. There was a little bug on this one. I just let him go into the dirt. These Syngoniums look really nice, and they're very easy to take care of. They grow very nicely in terrarium settings. The plant tied to this piece of driftwood is called Purple Passion. It's also grown very nicely within the terrarium setting. I like how the roots dip down into the water and give the frog something to hide behind. I added in the remaining plants and some mosses I got from my backyard. I just put the filter in on the side here to make maintenance in the future easier. Now it was time to fill the tank with water. I filled it up as high as the land area would allow. Unfortunately, a bit of an oversight on my part was the height of the land area. This limited the water level, and I had to turn the filter on its side to get it to work. I added in some water conditioner and accidentally filmed a vertical video, which I'm very pissed off about. I plugged in the light, and you could finally see the tank in its full glory. To add some visual flair, I added in some botanicals. These are just leaves I got out of my backyard. I boiled them to disinfect them and make them sink. I also added them to the land. Finally, I added some duckweed. Hopefully this grows in fast. The frog loves having a lot of it to hide in. The frog seems much more comfortable and happy in his new home. The land area is much more accessible than it was in the first tank. He spends a lot more time sitting on the bank. This replicates his natural habitat, where he would be ambushing prey on a pond's edge. He also likes to sit on the filter. I don't know why though.